Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're at. Thank you so much for joining us for another exciting podcast and webinar around the cloud migration and frequently asked questions. All the things that you wanted to know and you didn't know, who to go to. So today, I'm your host. I'm Kwang Lee. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Data Dynamics, and I'm joined by Tim Kressler. So Tim, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Tim Kressler. I'm a product manager with Microsoft. I've been in the storage industry for quite a long time, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys today.
All right, very good. Thank you, Tim. And so a couple of things that we wanted to go ahead and get started, on with everyone is what's going to be happening in 2023 as we're seeing all the various different types of issues. One of the consultants that we work with, Gartner, has been talking about that customers are looking at and accelerating their plans for cloud migration in 2023 because of the amount of potential savings that you have with that. When I look at this and I look at $592 billion in public cloud spending, it's a staggering number when we look at that. Tim, do you have any thoughts or comments around that?
No, I mean, I think it's one of the things that we've really noticed about these numbers is that they just keep getting bigger, right? More and more customers are trying to move data into the cloud, and they're really focused on putting data into the right space in the cloud as well. So it's not just lift and shift, it's optimizing, it's making sure that data is stored in the right tier, at the right space, in the right kind of cloud-based resource to enable the business and to make most cost-effective use of the money. So no, I think it's really interesting stuff for us to all pay attention to.
Yeah, and you alluded to a couple of real key things here, around what are the benefits of cloud computing and how it helps out gross margins and profitability. And just wanted to share like a couple of these items here. And I think you mentioned a couple of them, Tim, previously.
Mm-hmm.
But does any of these just like stand out to you where you're like, wow, like this was more than what you thought, or things that you see reinforcing what you've been seeing quite a bit?
Well, I think what's interesting, and it's kind of down second from the last at the bottom, is cloud-based disaster recovery is faster. And I think one of the things that we really need to think about when we work with our customers and when we try and better envision what a journey to the cloud will look like is not just how do I replicate what I was doing on-prem in the cloud, but how can I do things better for my company? How can I make it easier for me to recover from a disaster? How can I make it better for my users' experience? And it takes time, and it's kind of part of our job as stewards of a good IT spend and a good IT deployment to make sure that our customers are getting what they need. But it's worth it if we envision how can things be better, not just how can they be kind of replicated in the cloud.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen a lot of this as well, is that companies are looking at this and looking at it as a new paradigm, and how do I make the business better and how do I make the business stronger? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the real key things around that. So we'd like to have a real quick poll here. So it's time for a poll. So let me please, you can see right now in the polls section of the webinar what you see as some of the primary reasons that you're considering cloud migration. And what were some of the challenges? And just to help you guys out, I'm just going to bring this up again as some of the items that others are seeing and some of the challenges others are seeing. So we'll give this about another 30 seconds or so. Any other areas, Tim, that you would say that you've seen quite a bit?
I think, yeah, it's a good question. The number, I think one of the numbers I always struggle with is 40% firms stay cloud native first strategy in 2023. I think most companies are actually, I think that number is really pretty slow. I think most companies are really trying to understand where can they use cloud to improve their business overall. And that's, probably not necessarily something that you would call cloud native first, but it's absolutely a space where the business actually looks at the needs of the business and says, can I solve this with a cloud-based resource? Can I solve this with a cloud-based solution? And then if not, do we deploy our solution on-prem or do we deploy our solution in the cloud? And that's where you get the cloud native first conversation. But I think most companies are actually making the decision in advance of the deployment methodology to understand where they're going to deploy that resource and whether they'll take advantage of a cloud native resource.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's see what our audience thinks. So let me end the poll here. And so right now it's actually a tie between cost savings and flexibility. Interestingly enough, Tim, you were mentioning about the disaster recovery being one of the key differentiators, and that might just be something that is a benefit, but it looks like a lot of people are looking for, how do I drive down costs, but also how do I improve flexibility within the business and increase agility. The other items are also important, but it is very interesting seeing the cost savings and flexibility and where disaster recovery fits within that.
It makes a lot of sense. I think it really does. And I think one of the other things that we see is that flexibility is super important to our customers. It's not just about, can I deploy this in the cloud, but it's, can I deploy it in the cloud and use it for a month or two? And then if my business needs change, or if I need to make it bigger or smaller or turn it off or reconfigure it, can I do all of those things? And that's really where the cloud shines, right? There's no necessary investment in infrastructure that kind of would limit your ability to pivot based on the needs of the business over time.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Try out a lot of it first. Just be able to be a lot more agile. I mean, when you compare it to how long it takes within a lot of other customer environments, getting up something together to be able to try out an application or to try out like a new IT strategy or anything like that. It takes so long doing a traditional way, where with the cloud you can do it within minutes. So it makes sense.
Absolutely.
All right, so now let's get into the meat. Let's talk about what are the top 5 cloud migrations. The questions that you've had, and you would want answered, or a lot of your other friends are thinking about. So the first is that now that I want to go to the cloud and I see it because I want it for cost savings and flexibility, it's just migrating data. How tough can that be? So I think I've heard this quite a bit, but Tim, you want to talk about like what you've seen and what you've heard about this and your thoughts on.
Yeah, absolutely. I get this question all the time, not just from customers, but also from the Microsoft field, right? Because we have a lot of people in Microsoft that are great at application migrations. They're great at, how do I relocate my database from on-prem or into the cloud, or can move it from something that I hosted to a database as a service. But data migrations, a lot of people tend to think that they're actually fairly straightforward. And the truth is there's free tools out there for data migrations. Heck, you can just do a robocopy to move data from one spot to another. But a data migration in the cloud that is migrating, business or mission critical data really has to be more robust than just kind of, did I copy the data? We also have to log, where did the data go? We have to make sure that we understand that permissions and metadata is being preserved on the data as appropriate. We need to make sure it lands in the right spot. And for most of our customers, a data migration also involves a consolidation and a re-architecture of how data is stored, right? It's, a lot of people have grown into their existing NAS data footprint. And when they look at moving that into the cloud, they want to get a handle on it. They want to get a handle on understanding, does all this data need to be moved? Is it in the right order, in the right organizational structure, and do the right people have access to it? So it's fairly complex, and it needs a steady and skilled hand in order to help make it work really well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if all we're just talking about is just copying data, it's easy. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. It's all those things around, what are all my corporate security policies? What is my GDPR policies? How do I maintain data sovereignty? How do I make sure the right permissions? It's a different permissioning system that you might have from one environment to the other environment. How do you make sure that you update that accordingly? So yeah, there's a lot of considerations there, and I think that's the thing that everyone underestimates. They don't think about those types of challenges, and you definitely need to be thinking about that. Yeah. So the next type of question that we see here is that cloud looks expensive. And really, is this something that you should wait? Because that's what a lot of people can be asking is, cloud looks expensive when I look at and compare it to buying, storage, or I buy a server or something else like that. And is this something that's just, better put on hold until the economy gets better? So, Tim, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, obviously there are some projects that will be deferred because it's just not the right time for a business to make an investment. I think there's also a lot of times that we can use cloud as a cost savings and a cost right sizing strategy, right? So we can make sure that the people who are responsible for holding on to data are being asked to bear the true cost of the retention of that data, right? We can make sure that the right people have access to the right things. And then for a lot of our companies, a lot of the customers that we work with, moving to cloud also gives them the ability to change the way people work, which can actually be a significant cost savings, whether that's making it possible for people to work from home or work from remote locations. And so using virtual desktops and using cloud-based file storage methodologies, making it much easier for people to collaborate remotely, things like that, all the way to deprecating old DR data centers and things like that, where you may be maintaining a rack in a colo with a bunch of older equipment that's costly to maintain and costly to keep support on. There's a lot of ways that we can use cloud to actually improve costs and improve the budgetary numbers for a project, as opposed to just seeing it as a true expense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a lot about how do you work smarter, not harder, and about how do you rationalize what that data is, how you rationalize the productivity and the actions that you're taking, and then leveraging it. And one of the key aspects that we've identified is that many times infrastructure is not fully utilized, and you're paying for the cost of the entire capacity. Whereas when we look at the cloud, you're paying for what you use. So it's actually a lot more effective, in terms of what you're paying for. So this is another thing that we hear quite a bit, is that my data is much more secure and compliant on premise, right?
I mean, yeah, it's possible, right? Like it's possible to make your data very secure on premises, and it's possible to make your data compliant on premises, and certainly where it's located, right? If it's in your cage, in your data center, or in your rack, or wherever, like where it is. But there's a bunch of things that we don't think about when we talk about security and talk about running our own services on premise. It's not to say that you can't, right? But if you store your data in Azure files, then that the data is backed up, or not backed up, but that the data is stored in a platform that's being continuously security audited. We know that it's compliant. We know that it's stored in the region that we've decided to store it in. We can a lot of times have better understanding of who has permissions to that data, things like that. And the same would be true about storing in Azure NetApp files or in any of the other Azure Blob Storage, things like that, right? What we oftentimes lose track of in an on-prem deployment is the patching, the auditing, the things that go along with maintaining compliance and security and on-prem, all the way down to even data center security, right? Like nobody has access to Microsoft Azure data centers, right? We're very tightly controlled. We make sure that we understand everybody who has access to things. That's not to say that one way is better or worse than the others, right? I think what I oftentimes talk with my customers about, particularly when they're evaluating deploying something as a service, is that it just gets you out of the low level maintenance of that service that you have to do if you're going to deploy that on-prem, right? So if you're running NetApp filers on-prem, you have to make sure that they're patched and they're updated and that the security is taken care of. Whereas if you run Azure NetApp files in the cloud, a lot of that is taken care of for you. Really, all you have to do is operate the service at that point. As long as everybody understands what the trade-offs are with both, there's no one right way to do it, but it is certainly something that can reduce the overall administrative burden if you could start to move some of those kind of primitives off into as a service offerings in the cloud.
Yeah, that makes sense. Leveraging Microsoft's expertise in terms of managing the systems, managing the infrastructure, managing the patching, that helps out quite a bit. One of the experiences that we have that I want to share is that whether your data is on-premise or on the cloud or anything else, security and compliance is really based up in terms of you as well. So even though your data may be stored on-prem and you did all the things that Tim just talked about, managing patches and got everything correct, what we've seen quite a bit is that many times data is overshared. So data may be sitting somewhere that everyone has access to. So for example, some sales reps, they don't like to use CRM systems. So what do? They extract everything from their CRM system, store it in Excel, share it with everybody. And it's much easier to share it with everybody and have everyone go access it. And then you have people's names and addresses and credit card numbers and email addresses and all that stuff out there. That's a PII issue. Or what we've also identified is whether it's developers or it's users or whatever, they like to store their username passwords in plain text files. And to make it easy for them, they put it into a share that everyone has access to. They might not have realized that, but then now that creates cybersecurity threats and all of that. So that's not an on-premise or a cloud thing. That comes down to taking the next steps. So putting it in the cloud, I think first it solves the infrastructure questions and problems. But then the second is your data is only as secure when you focus in terms of securing and maintaining compliance. And this is one of the things that you want to make sure that you're thinking about. So by going to the cloud, you can offload that first part and then focus on in terms of making sure the right people have access to the data that they should have access to. And that's where you can put your focus and energy instead of worrying about the patches and hardware.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Kwong.
All right. Very good. So let's go on to question number 4. So is expert level skill required for cloud migration, or can my team handle it? Tim, you probably heard quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard this quite a bit, and the true answer is it depends, right? Like if we're talking about a single small file share, a Windows server that has been hosting a couple of terabytes worth of file data, it's probably something that you can do, and certainly having the right tooling is very critical for this, right? Which is where data dynamics comes in. The right tools can really help you understand what you're migrating. They can help you, make sure that you are able to provide proof that you migrated the data, preserve the attributes of the data that you want to, make sure that the security is really well understood. But migrations get complex quickly, right? And in those situations, it's nice to have a vendor who's able to help you out with your migration and can provide some expertise. And that's really also where data dynamics comes in, right? Like they've got the right people and the right resources to make sure that your migration is going to go smoothly.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of things that we don't think about, because when when we work with a lot of customers, like you're absolutely right. Small customers, you have a guy who knows everything. but really in a large enterprise, there's so many different people and organizations are involved. So everyone from your CISO organization, wants to make sure that you're doing information security properly. Your data officer, chief data officer, wants to make sure that you're not creating any risk, for the business, in terms of putting certain types of data out there that shouldn't be. Your lines of businesses who want to make sure that, hey, as I'm doing this, I want to have this, type of thing be smart. And then you're dealing with, what do you do with data that, belongs to people no longer with the company and no one has access? What do you do with that orphan data, right? How do you go handle that? How do you handle all the security mapping and the complexities with that? How do you handle setting up the express routes and making sure that you have all the ADs integrated? I mean, there's a number of different things around this that isn't in your day-to-day job or your day-to-day expertise. And that's what makes it challenging, is being able to coordinate all those different types of capabilities, but then just making sure that you know enough to be able to go and work those details. And so that's where having that expertise in enterprise is critical.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think it's just important to know, as much as it is important to know what you know, it's important to know what you don't know. And I think there's a lot of times when we start doing a migration like this, it's not something we do on a regular basis. It's not the easiest. One of the things that I've seen customers be pretty successful with is to pick a specific migration project and engage with data dynamics and get their assistance on that. And then a lot of times you can learn how to use the tooling and how to be most effective with these migration projects through your first one or two, and then can kind of build almost a migration factory where you continue to move data from on-prem storage and on-prem systems into the cloud, and take most of that work internal as opposed to relying on data dynamics and other outside people to help with.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I would say the hardest part is getting started. Yeah. And it's getting everything mapped out and work. But once you have that, it becomes a very simple mechanical process that your team can do. But just to get started with, you just want to make sure that you're looking at all these different areas. But once it's all set up, the software automates everything, and your team can just go ahead and handle it going forward. So excellent point there, Tim. Let's move on to question number 5. Cloud migration is a disruptive change and will affect my operations. Why should I do it?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I honestly, I mean, it's something that we see a lot. One of the things that I always say is that it can be disruptive, but in a lot of cases, it's disruptive for positive, right? It's you're helping your users work differently in a more effective way. And I as a new person at Microsoft who's been through a couple of different OEMs in the industry, I've previously worked for Cumulo, I've worked for NetApp, I've worked for other companies like that. I worked for GCP for a while. One of the things that I'd like to say is that, employees really, they want to work in an environment that works the way that they need to work, right? They want tools and systems that will help them get their job done with a minimum of disruption and a minimum of frustration. And so, migrating your users from a traditional on-prem system that maybe has mapped drives, maybe has a lot of in-application dependencies that are on-prem based, that maybe requires a VPN, moving that to a more cloud native solution that lets users work where they want to work, lets users collaborate with people the way they're used to collaborating in a modern way. I mean, that's it's disruption, but it's disruption for a really positive reason, as opposed to kind of, keeping your users caught in a more traditional IT deployment that's on-prem. So yeah, it can be disruptive, but it's disruptive and it improves user access to data, security, ease of use, all of those kinds of things, which is, I think, really critical for employee retention and employee happiness and business efficiency.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to the cloud, and this is part of the cost. And I think one of the real key things you want to look at is if you understand all the challenges it takes to do the cloud migration, you can minimize any type of disruption. And there are a number of different techniques and capabilities in which you can go do to minimize that disruption. And that's where that's where we can help out with the expertise, with the software and all of that. Even simple things like if you think about, file shares and, people who use Microsoft DFS, you can go ahead and we can make the move and then we can make it transparent to them by updating the DFS links to now point off into Azure versus being on-prem. Just a simple example. Or things that, we can get the data incrementally, migrated and updated and so forth, but then, that cutover becomes a very small window. So we can minimize all that disruption, for your customers and for your users. And, those are some of the real key aspects there. And so time for the next poll. And in this poll, the question comes down to is, what challenges do you anticipate during the cloud migration process? What are some of the things that you see as big issues and some of the things that you're concerned about? So if you heard a little bit from Tim and myself, and some of the ones that we think about, what do you think? And your choices here is like, data security. How do I make sure I secure data in the whole process? Data integration. How do I get everything to work together and make sure that we continue doing that? How complex migrations are, and then also how do I get my staff to the skill set and the level that I need to get them at? So a couple points there. Tim, any thoughts about that as our viewers are voting?
No, I think you brought up a lot of really good questions. Skilling your staff is really important. How do we get everybody to have the right skills? How do we transition into these new systems is always going to be a challenge as well. Like how do we cut the business over? One of the ones that I love too is how do we kind of shut off the old systems? So it's really interesting to migrate people to new data platforms to move, and then there's always that like, okay, everybody hold your breath. How do we turn this system off to make sure that we're really, kind of taking advantage and everybody's using the new environment? So there's a lot to be considered there. I'm interested to know what the audience has to say.
Yeah, for sure. There is quite a bit there. So I don't know. I almost feel like, this poll's coming out just too exact and rounding in terms of numbers. Because when I look at all the people out there, I was seeing like 11% here, 12%, 43%. It was all like a horse race. But interestingly enough, it comes out to be very nice round numbers when we look at the poll results. So it's a tie between data integration and complexity of the migration process. It was just interesting seeing all of that. But I was like, how did it end up to be a perfect tie? Between that. But that's what you see, and that's what you're saying. And I think this is the areas that we look at. How do we help? driving that and just making things a lot simpler to make this so that it's not an area of concern.
Yeah.
So let's start off with, how do we help? So the
Yeah.
Azure File Migration Program. So Tim, you want to speak about that?
Absolutely. So, I've been in storage almost my whole career, and through my entire career, most commonly the place you're migrating the data to. So if you're upgrading from an EMC box to a NetApp box or vice versa, the vendor that's receiving the data is also offered to offset the cost of the migration tools. And so one of the things that Microsoft did is we've kind of adopted that moving forward as to customers that are moving file data into Azure as well. So for all of our customers, any customer, pretty much any size, right? We would like a minimum amount of data just because it's a big engagement in order for us to afford it. But any size customer, any amount of data wants to be migrated up into Azure, we're offering the Azure File Migration Program. And so what happens is the data gets migrated by Data Dynamics, or there's a couple other vendors in the program as well, but Data Dynamics is one of the founding members of the program. And once the data is migrated, we pay Data Dynamics for doing that migration, for offering the tools to use. And so whether you bring 20 terabytes or 50 terabytes or a petabyte of data up into Azure, Data Dynamics tooling will help you with the migration process. And then when you're done, the Microsoft team on the back end will pay Data Dynamics for it, and everybody wins. There's really no paperwork to fill out. There's not a lot of, there's no approvals. There's no big, kind of upfront engagement that you have to go to. You just work with Data Dynamics through their offer and marketplace. It says Azure Data Dynamics, or Data Dynamics offer is sponsored by Azure. And you kind of go forward and take advantage of it. It works really, really well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you pointing that out, Tim, because it is a very risk-free way of getting started. And the whole benefit here is that, our SMEs, our expertise, our software helps you. And our objective is to help drive as much as possible, as, what Tim talked about, is reduce that risk, make it easier for you, get you on your cloud journey onto Azure as quickly and rapidly as possible. And it's a win-win proposition, for all of us. And you don't have to worry about costs. You don't have to worry about the expertise. Those are all things that are covered for you. And it is really that easy. I mean, I think in the program, all you have to do is just give us your subscription ID, and then time when you want to meet, and then we just work from there. I mean, it is really straightforward.
And overall in the program, we've migrated well over a petabyte worth of data. So this is kind of well known for large and small customers. It's a really well-known environment. And so we're here to help, right? We're here to make sure that you get the data migrated up into Azure as you need to. And the data can land in a number of different products inside of Azure. So it can go to Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files or Azure Blob Storage. So there's not really any, strong restriction around where you would choose to put the data. You just get the ability to take advantage of Azure and move your data into a cloud native solution.
Yeah, and the whole thing is, as you're doing this, you can look at how do I do it smarter. So not just how do I do it, but how do I do it smarter? So as Tim was talking about, there's a number of different ways or a number of different technologies you can leverage, and we'll help you with that. We'll help you in terms of determining what data belongs on Azure Blob, what data belongs in Azure NetApp Files, what data belong on Azure Files. We will help you with that and make sure that we're doing the right placement. But in addition to that, some additional things that we do is we help you structure your unstructured data. And so what that really means is, as we go in and we discover your data, we can help you classify your data and do things such as tagging, sensitivity labels, various other things like that, to make sure that that information is getting brought over in terms of the metadata and all of that, whether it's stored directly as blob, as a tag, or whether it's metadata attributes within Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files. So those are things that we go and we do. And then also, how do we help you with access management? And so there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on, right now for a number of different reasons. And being able to bring in different environments and updating all the ACLs and the security management and all of that becomes important. And that's what we also can do out of the box to help you with, is how do we map, let's say, John Doe at old company to John Doe at new company, and go and do that, or or any of those other scenarios. Is being able to make sure that you map that so that you have the right people with the right access, to that data? Or what do you do with data that's orphaned? And then a lot of this is around improving your productivity and getting you immediate ROI. And then the key thing about what we do is that we provide a enterprise class level support. So it's 24/7 support where we will help train your teams, work with your teams, handhold through the entire process. And then if there's any type of challenges, we'll be there with you. And then for your first set of migrations, we'll be there with you all the way from beginning to end to make sure that you're successful. Because our success is based on your success, and that's the real key thing around that. So in terms of the steps, first you want to identify what is your data. I think the data discovery has been the hardest thing for a lot of different organizations. You don't even know what you have. So let's start off with knowing what you have and identify that. And then once you've identified your data and you discovered it, then it's about what data do I have out there that might be at risk, like has sensitive data or PII data, and let's make sure you do a risk classification or remediation around it. And then after that, after you've done that analysis, then you can go ahead and act. And this is where acting is all the different data migrations and data placement. And our recommendation is do it smart. So, instead of doing a lift and shift, the value comes around when you do it smart, because when you do it smart, you can reduce your data footprint to what you actually need, which then reduces your cost. The other thing is that you can enrich your data. So as your data goes on to, let's say, ADLS or those things, you enrich your data, and now you're able to go and search and find and so forth. So Tim, anything you'd like to add?
No, I want to make sure that I kind of talk or emphasize how important it is to do the analysis before we act, right? Remediation around sensitive data, understanding where that sensitive data is, making sure that we just understand what data we're really planning on moving and its value to the environment or to the enterprise is really critical. It's one thing to move the data, right? The data copy part is actually pretty straightforward. It's another thing entirely to understand what you're moving, where you're moving it to, and what the impact that's going to have on your business.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. All right. So now, most important part, your questions. So you've heard the top 5. You've heard Tim and I speak about a number of different things. So let's go ahead and open things up, for your questions. So please go ahead and submit your questions into the chat. Okay, so I've had a couple of questions pop up. So Tim, one of the questions is, when you say free, do you really mean free?
I do really mean free. Yeah. So Microsoft pays the cost of the migration tool back to Data Dynamics. So basically what happens is Data Dynamics works with you. They do the migration. When the migration's all done, they say, hey, Microsoft, we moved 20 terabytes of data for XYZ company. Pay me. And we say, okay, yeah, absolutely. We see that you moved 20 terabytes of data for them. So here's your check, right? And that's all it really takes. There's no engagement for the customer at all, right? There's nothing for you to do to submit for the payment from Microsoft's perspective or anything like that. You just give the subscription that you're migrating the data into information to the Data Dynamics team so that we know where the data is going. And we kind of take a peek into your account on the back end and see how much data is consumed in which platforms. And that's how we validate it. Very, very straightforward process. And it really makes everybody happy, right? Not just the customers and not just Data Dynamics, but also the Microsoft field, right? Because the Microsoft field, people don't want any more paperwork to submit or anything like that. So they're always really happy when I tell them that we'll handle all the paperwork on the back end. And that's really what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you. And then the second question came in is, can you share an example about how you have helped companies adopt the cloud and what were the challenges they were facing?
I mean, it's a good question because, so many of the companies that I work with are in the middle of adopting the cloud and really trying to get a better understanding. And it really just depends on the workloads, right? So for some companies, they're considering cloud as a DR archive, kind of low use but highly critical solution for their environment. But I've got plenty of customers that are also looking at moving, vast amounts of file data up into the cloud so that they can burst compute with it and do, manage to mission critical workloads and things like that. One thing that I thought was pretty interesting too is we've seen customers moving data up into the cloud so that they can take advantage of using Azure AI kind of tooling against it, or being able to use that data to run analytics on it for big data workloads for data lake warehouses, those kinds of things. So really, I mean, there's such a diverse kind of amount of workloads. It's really hard to kind of pick one to just focus on.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Do you see Danny's question in the chat? I think I can go ahead and address it. So Danny asked, who monitors the data that is moved to Azure, Data Dynamics or Microsoft, and how do I know what I've consumed? So you'll know what you've consumed because you see that every month on your bill from Azure. So if it's if you're putting the data in blob storage, you see every month how much data is stored in blob storage, because we bill you basically per hour for data that's stored in Azure. And then from beyond that, so Data Dynamics has telemetry that's built into their application that says, okay, that this customer moved 20 terabytes of data up into Azure. But on the back end, we use your subscription information and just run a report against that subscription and say how much data was in the subscription in January of this year, or how much data was in Azure Blob in that subscription in January of this year. And we see, oh, there was 5 terabytes. And then Data Dynamics told us they moved 20 terabytes. And now when we look in March, there's 25 terabytes of data in Azure Blob in that subscription. And that's all we do. So nobody at Microsoft has the ability to see the actual data that's written in the subscription. The only thing we can see about the data is the metadata, like so how much data is stored and then kind of access patterns and things like that. But we don't get to see actual data or anything like that. From that perspective, privacy perspective, PII, HIPAA compliance, all of that kind of stuff. That's all still very true about Microsoft and the way that the data is stored inside of the platform. And Data Dynamics, I don't believe, unless I'm wrong, Kwong, Data Dynamics has no ability to see what data was moved. They just see the kind of the metadata about it as well, like how much data was moved as a part of a particular migration job.
Well, that's right. That's absolutely right. So we're in 6 out of the top 12 financial companies in the world. So you can already imagine the rules and regulations and all that type of stuff. And so everything we do in our software is around that security, the data security. And the only information that we get is the telemetric information, like how many terabytes has been migrated and where it was migrated to. And between that and what Microsoft gets, we can cross-reference and know how much value that you're getting from the overall solution. So the next question I got, Tim, is what is the best way to ensure year-on-year cost savings with the cloud?
Ooh, that's a tough one, right? Because, I think cost, one of the things that is a downside about cloud is that it's very specific in the cost, right? If you store data, you're paying to store the data. If you're running compute, you're paying to run that compute, right? So what most of our customers really focus on from a cloud cost savings perspective is making sure that they're using services that are really being used. So when you procure storage on-prem, if you're going to buy a file storage solution on-prem from any of the vendors, it's a one-time purchase, but that storage, you have to buy a large bucket of storage, right? Whether you know that you're going to use it all or not. So you buy a 50 terabyte solution and then you start to fill it up over time, right? So maybe in year 1, it's only a quarter or a third full. In year 2, it's maybe 2/3 full. And then year 3, it's full. And then the storage lives, kind of forever, right? You pay maintenance on it, and it exists forever. The way to really control your costs in the cloud and the way to really manage things is to be really rigorous about whether or not services are being taken advantage of, to only provision what you need at that moment, right? Because the best part about cloud is that you can always get more compute and more capacity when you need it. And then to really make sure that the data is being billed back, or the cost of those solutions is being billed back to the people who are asking for them to be provisioned, and making sure that they're being used by the people who say they're being used. It's much better because you really can understand exactly who's using who's using the solutions that you're deploying in the cloud. You can make sure that the data is actually being taken advantage of. And in most cases, you can use data for more than just the initial reason that you procured it, right? You can run Azure AI against it and develop trends. You can use it in a data lake or data warehouse or something along those lines. So it's really the best way to be good stewards of the money that you're spending in cloud is to make sure that you're taking advantage of the tools and make sure that you're really right-sizing your deployments and doing the things that are necessary. Wouldn't be a webinar if my dog didn't decide to bark. Sorry.
Right, no worries. This is the modern day of work from home and work remote, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So some additional things I would add is start right away, start as soon as possible, because there are significant cost savings that can be driven just by managing your data smarter. And so it's about, once you understand your data, there's probably quite a bit of it that you can go and, let's say, move off into an archive tier or into, blob tier, within Azure that can help drive out a lot of costs. If you think about some of the projects that we've worked on with a number of customers, they were looking at data center consolidation. So the soonest you can save money is by actually completing the data center consolidation project. And then that way you will no longer require or need any of those environments going forward. So that's a way to save money is go do that. Or if you look at some of the systems that you might have on-prem, things such as like leases are running out or maintenance is running out and you have to go do those things. Those would also be very prime systems that the sooner that you go and you take those out, the sooner that you can go ahead and realize some immediate cost savings. So there's very tangible, practical things that you can immediately bend the cost curve right now. And then on an ongoing basis, as Tim was talking about, is just understanding the data, rationalizing it, classifying it, and doing ongoing data management and curation of it are going to be really key things that you want to do to be able to drive that year-on-year cost savings.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes perfect sense. I saw a question from Mike that marketing posted up through the QA that once the data has been migrated, where do the applications that access the data actually run? And I think there's a really kind of good point to make as a part of that question. So applications run best when they have very close access, like low latency access to their data. That's just generally how they're written, right? And so if we're going to move the data that backends an application into the cloud, then it's most effective and most recommended to move the application itself up into the cloud. And applications can run in a variety of spots, right? You can deploy server VMs inside of the cloud and run the application by yourself on a server. Like you can just build and deploy that application on a server. You can use Azure Functions or other kind of various kind of containers-based solutions to run applications in Azure. But generally speaking, it's actually kind of the opposite idea when customers approach us about moving data into the cloud. They say, hey, we're moving this application into the cloud. We're refactoring this application. We're going to deploy it using containers in the cloud, or we want to move it. We want to migrate our server VMs up into the cloud, or whatever we're going to do. How do we move the data up to support that application? And that's really the way that most of our customers think about it. But it's a really good question. Thanks for asking it, Mike.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with data gravity in your application. Yeah. And where they sit, and the key is that a lot of companies are first saying, okay, well let's do these applications, but they're not thinking about the data. And if you think about the network, the bandwidth, all those things that you have to go and do, and so it makes the most sense, that as you're moving your applications, go move the data with it, and have that data sitting in it so that you have the data gravity there, and you get that real efficiency. But that data can also be accessed on-prem or in remote locations or everywhere else. And you now have a scalable network that you can go and do that across and not have to worry about whether you have the bandwidth or the capacity, because that's all handled for you by Azure. Okay, I think that does it for our Q&A. I don't see any other questions here. So 3 simple ways to get started. First, you can contact us via email at azure@datdyne.com to register your migration project. We also have a link up on our website that is available in offers that you can also go ahead and go there and register to get started. What we'll do is we will introduce you to our customer success team, who's going to be working with you through the entire process, help you with understanding your data, your environment, how to be successful with this, provide training, and all of that type of stuff. And then we'll help you kick off the migration. And once you get that going, you got it from there. So really quick, simple, risk-free, type approach. So your best way to do this is get started. and get started right away. And feel free to reach out to us anytime if there's anything we can help with. Tim, my distinguished guest, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely.
For helping out and participating.
Yeah, I think also just wanted to point out that if you go to the offers link in the webinar, you can click right there, the learn more link, and it'll just take you straight into the Data Dynamics Microsoft landing zone. So quick, easy way to get access to all the content and all the details around the program.
All right. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Guys.
Thank you, everyone. Y'all take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kwong. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.